In this video, we're going to answer the question, should you pay off the mortgage on your rental properties? I think that's a great question and something that we hear from a lot of investors, and they ask us, should they pay off the mortgage on their rentals? So we're going to talk about that. We're going to look at the pros and the cons. We're going to see how debt affects cash flow and risk. And then we're just also going to look at tax considerations. And I was just talking the other day with a friend of mine who's a financial advisor, and I was just telling him, I think I'm just going to go ahead and pay off the rest of the mortgage on my primary residence. We've lived there a while. We don't have too much left. And he said, don't do it. I'm going to advise against that. And so that started a really healthy debate on should you or should you not pay off the mortgage on your primary residence. But here we're talking about rentals. So should you or shouldn't you? And I think there's a lot to be said for either way you look at it. Let's go ahead and get into it. So let's first look at the pros and the cons. I think obviously the pros, let's go down the list here. It increases monthly cash flow. We know that when you have your rental income minus your expenses, so expenses could be vacancy, it could be repairs and maintenance, those type insurance, taxes, those types of things. That is called, when you have income versus minus those expenses, that's called net operating income. But then what you also have to put in there is your mortgage. So your mortgage payment usually is one of the biggest expenses if you have a mortgage on a rental property. But when you pay that mortgage off, all you have to deal with then is just the normal expenses that come with owning rental property. Could be property management fees, whatever. So you increase your monthly cash flow. I think that's great. Obviously, your equity builds in the property. If you pay it off, you've got the whole thing's equity, the value of the property. So whatever the appraised value, the after repair ARV value is, that's what you have equity in that property. And you may say, hey, I have access to that. That's great. And then ultimately, man, if you are a Dave Ramsey fan, then you see this as less financial stress and more security. So you're just thinking all the time, wow, the sooner the better. I can pay this off and be done with it. So those are the pros. What are the cons? You really can't take this money and invest it elsewhere. And so this is one of the things I was talking with my friend about, just about the primary residence, was he was saying, what happens if you pay off the mortgage, you have all this equity, and then there was a circumstance with a friend of ours, they had a ton of equity in their property, they paid it way down, and then simultaneously he lost his job and got sick at the same time, and so the bank wouldn't let him access the equity in that house to help pay for expenses, and so he was like, that's a big risk. But that's not usually the case in rental properties. You would usually want that equity to go invest it in another rental property. So if you don't have that cash, then you're going to have to pull that equity out, right? And then obviously more cash is tied up in a single asset. So you've got this, if you do pay it off, you've got this cash, this access to cash, you've taken it out of your bank or wherever you took it from, and you've paid it down. And so it's tied up into that asset unless you take a loan out again to access that cash. All right, cash flow versus debt. Obviously, with no mortgage, rental income becomes pure profit minus the expenses. Again, you always want to be careful with your expenses. You want to factor in vacancy. You want to factor in repairs and maintenance. You also want to think long-term about CapEx expenditures, roofs, water heaters, those types of things. Those are really, really important to account for. But really, again, that mortgage is usually one of the largest expenses on a property. So cash flow is great when you don't have a mortgage. It's great. And this is what a lot of people are looking for. A lot of people are looking for, how can I build up a portfolio of rental houses so that I can replace my W-2 income? And there's thousands of stories of this happening. With patience and with discipline, this is what happens. But a lot of times it's because they start paying off properties. They start using the cash flow from other properties to dump in and pay off a mortgage on one. And so they just start kind of snowballing the debt payoff on those properties. So cash flow is great. With debt, obviously keeping the mortgage means lower cash flow, but more liquidity. If you have the cash, you have it somewhere else and you can go and use it for other things. We've talked about that. That's really important. So what about the tax considerations? obviously you can, if you're paying a mortgage, you can take the interest on that rental property and you can use it to deduct from the income on that rental property, right? So whatever you paid in interest, you can use that to offset income that you received from the property. So the example you pay, if you had $10,000 in mortgage interest for the year, you can deduct that amount from your rental income. Real simple. There's really not a tax advantage for paying off the mortgage. Then a lot of that rental income is going to be taxable to you minus certain expenses. All right, when to pay off debt? When should you pay off debt? I think when you have stable cash flow, makes a lot of sense. If again, the way we see it usually happen is when people have multiple properties and they can take some of the excess cash flow and they combine it and snowball it in to help pay off and speed up the mortgage of one of them. And again, this doesn't all have to be, hey, I've got a big wad of cash and I'm paying the whole thing off with one payment. It could be you just take the cash flow from other properties and use it to pay down that mortgage. But what you need to remember is, as you're doing that, you're not putting that cash aside for other things that might come up, other investments or other expenses that you might have on properties, big CapEx expenditures. I think when you have stable cash flow, it makes sense. Also, if you're thinking long-term, some people are thinking, I want to own these rental properties for 5 years. They have a 5-year horizon. Maybe they have a 7-year horizon, and then they want to 1031 exchange it, sell it, and then use that money to roll it up into a bigger rental portfolio, maybe a multifamily. We see this happen a lot. And so if you're thinking long-term, hey, I just want to build a portfolio. I've got several people here in Birmingham that I know that have built portfolios of over 100 houses, and they were just using cash flow and they were just paying off debt. And they held those things. They didn't have any plans on selling them. 2 of the people that I'm thinking of right now actually did sell their properties to some private equity groups. So that can happen as well. But if you have a long-term mindset, then obviously paying off debt would probably be a good idea. And then also just, again, what we mentioned here with the whole Dave Ramsey thing, risk tolerance. If you're risk adverse, paying off the mortgage may make you feel better. You may sleep better at night. When a resident turns in and says, hey, I'm not going to renew my lease. It's been, I've lived here for 24 months. At the end of my 24-month lease term, I'm going to move out. Things have changed for me or whatever. I want to move to a different property. It won't stress you out more than likely, if you paid off that mortgage and you've been able to set aside cash flow, it's allows you to sleep a little bit better at night. So final considerations, balance, just consider your financial goals, your risk tolerance. I think those are 2 key things. What are your goals, long-term, short-term, and then your risk tolerance. And then the key factors, what we've talked about, are cash flow, investment opportunities. If you're looking to buy other things, then you probably don't want to just dump all of the available cash that you have into paying off this mortgage. Tax situation, and then just personal preferences. What do you really want to do? And so final thought, evaluate the pros and the cons and make the best decision for you. I think no matter which one you choose, I think there's definitely pros to both of those, to not paying off and to paying off. Some people don't like debt. Some people are good using debt to do other things. They know they can get a higher return than what they're actually paying on the debt. So those are the considerations. Those are the main considerations. Hope this has been helpful to you. Go ahead and like this video, subscribe to our channel. We'd love for you to see more investor-friendly videos just like this one.